Okay, standard 3 is on life science. So remember back to biology. Yep, biology. There are 4 strands. So we have 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. So this will be 40 questions again for your quiz. Yeah, our quiz will be Monday. Okay, so students, 3.1 says students will investigate and describe the chemical basis of the growth, development, and maintenance of cells. And you do this by identifying the complex molecules, the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids that make up living organisms. So what are carbohydrates? It's our source of energy. We use this to make energy, and what is that molecule that we use to make energy? Glucose. Oh my God, is that right? Yes. All right, sugar molecules. So fructose, lactose, all those are different. Sucrose, those are all carbohydrates, but the most common that we use is glucose. Starch is a big carbohydrate. It's a macromolecule. Lipids. Fatty acids. Where are fatty acids used a lot? Probably the most common that you talked about. Phospholipid bilayer. Do you remember that term? Where is that? It's in the cell membrane. So you have a phosphate backbone, and then you have the 2 fatty acids coming off of it, and there's a bilayer, so there's 2 layers because the fatty acids are hydrophobic. They point away from the water, and you have a phospholipid bilayer. Nucleic acids, where do you find those? No? In the nucleus. In what molecule? DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid. And what's the other one? RNA. Nucleotides are the individual nucleic acids. They're called nucleotides. Like A, C, G, T, all those are nucleotides. And U, those are the 4, 5. What's an enzyme? Catalyst. And what does a catalyst do? Speeds up a reaction. What ending do you see if it's something's an enzyme? ACE. So the one in anatomy and physiology we're talking about right now, or we just got done talking about, is acetylcholinesterase. So an ASE ending, it breaks up acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that your nerves produce to get a muscle to contract. And so they have to break it down so there's not a constant muscle contraction, and you do that with acetylcholinesterase. What makes up a protein? What are the individual little... amino acids. So a chain of amino acids makes up a protein.
So why is enzymes by protein?
Why is what?
Are enzymes and proteins?
Enzymes are proteins. There's some proteins that are not enzymes, but all enzymes are proteins. Okay. B says identify the form and function of subcellular structures that regulate cellular activities. These are all organelles, all those organelles that do all the important stuff in your body. Cell membrane, where is that located? What kind of cell? Outer part of it, but it's in the animal cells? And plant, right? plants have cell membranes? What about a cell wall, though? Yep, just plants. If we had cell walls, we'd have everything would be rigid. Yeah. Very little movement going on. Even bone cells have just a cell membrane, but they're surrounded by, it's called a matrix, but they're surrounded by mineral and different hard compounds that make the bone hard. That's not the actual cell. What's a chloroplast? Contain chlorophyll. Yeah, and what's that process called? Yes.
That one. Photosynthesis.
What?
The other day we were playing this game in American history where you have to like roll the dice, and Ben K was like, and it was so funny.
Fluid inside the cell, the cytoplasm. So everything inside the cell, organelles float around and do it.
Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Powerhouse, so what does it produce? In the form of what molecule?
Glucose.
No, they use glucose.
What molecule? Oxygen. Carbon dioxide.
ATP.
Dang it.
I remember.
Adenine triphosphate. ATP. That would be like electron transport chain, Krebs cycle, glycolysis. Yeah, remember all that good stuff? Yeah. What cells would have a lot of mitochondria? Because they require a lot of energy.
Brain cells.
No?
Muscle cells.
Muscle cells, yeah.
Is the brain not
Not really, no. Nucleus. What is inside the nucleus? What's the important thing that's housed inside the nucleus?
the DNA.
DNA. These are all organelles, so we don't need to. What's a ribosome? What does it produce?
Oh, RNA, right?
No. It uses RNA, so they attach to the RNA and they produce proteins.
Okay, I was close.
And then what's a vacuole?
It's like it's like a thing.
What's it store? Big packet. What? No, what's it store? It stores. No.
Water?
Water. Stores water. There's a couple more that are missing. Can you guys think of ones that are missing?
I don't know. I can like see the picture of it, but I can't think of the name.
Rough and smooth ER, endoplasmic reticulum.
Can we try to think of
I would, yeah. Why is rough ER called rough?
because it's like
Yeah, what are those little specks on it that gives it that rough appearance? Yep, have ribosomes. So since it has ribosomes, it produces. Yep. Smooth ER, no ribosomes. What do they produce? Lipids. So these are produced inside. There's an inside and outside to the the ER, right? And they get produced, and then they pinch off, and they have their own membrane around them. They're a vesicle, and they get transported to the Golgi apparatus. The packaging, the UPS system. Did you guys call it the UPS store? Maybe. But then those get modified a little bit.
wait, what? It's modified?
proteins and lipids from the ER. They get modified and packaged and then shipped. And they put it's in another vesicle and it leaves the Golgi apparatus and goes to the outside of the cell. Can you think of any other ones? Those are the only ones I could think of that we're missing. Carly, put your phone away. That's not away. Hey, C, describe the cellular functions of photosynthesis, respiration, cell division, protein synthesis, transport of materials, and energy capture and release. So all these different processes that occur within a cell. Cells are busy. Cellular transport includes active transport and passive transport. So we're going to just talk about those. What's the difference between active and passive? So active transport requires ATP. It needs energy because you're moving substances against their concentration gradient. The concentration gradient. So usually, normally, and this is in passive transport, it's with the concentration gradient. So in passive transport, without any energy, molecules will move from high concentrations to low concentrations until it becomes at equilibrium and they're equal to each other. Active transport requires ATP, and a lot of times, it will use a pump, and that's a protein that goes across the cell membrane, but it will pump like the sodium-potassium pump. Did you guys talk about that one? But it pumps sodium and potassium outside, so it goes against the concentration from low to high concentrations. And it requires ATP to do that because it's not a natural, just flow down the concentration gradient. Some examples of passive transport would be like diffusion and osmosis. Active transport would be like the sodium-potassium pump. It's called, but you require some sort of channel protein. You guys talk about protein channels in biology? We do in A&P. If you take anatomy and physiology next year, we talk about a lot of proteins that cross the membrane. Cell membranes are selectively permeable, allow only certain materials to pass. That's because part of it's hydrophobic and part of it's hydrophilic. Okay, I think that's all about transportation. Let's look at cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is part of metabolism. This is all the reactions in the body. So using and producing energy. Cellular respiration is the part where you use energy. So you use glucose and what else do you use? Oxygen to produce what? In the form of what molecule? ATP. And then what's the byproduct? carbon dioxide. And there is aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic, way down at the bottom, you would use O2 and you produce up to 38 ATP. Especially when you get into the electron transport chain, you produce a lot of ATP. Aerobic respiration. Versus anaerobic has no oxygen, and it produces only about 2 ATP, and the other byproduct is lactic acid, which is part of the reason why, if you haven't worked out for a while, you get sore muscles. Okay, next we talked about enzymes already. We don't talk about those again. We already talked about photosynthesis too. So that's a cellular function. We just have been talking about animal cells mostly, but occur in plants. Right? Didn't we talk about photosynthesis produces the glucose? Okay. Last part, protein synthesis. There's 2 parts to it, transcription and translation. Do you know what's a transcriptionist? Like you can become a medical transcriptionist. What would you do? Yeah. Right. A medical transcription copies. When you go to the doctor, usually when they leave the room, they go and tape record what they thought. It's easier than just writing it down. They can get more in a short amount of time. So then they'll send those little tapes to a medical transcriptionist, and they type out what they said. So, what? Yes. Right. So there's a lot of steps that go through this, but basically it changes DNA to RNA and it pairs the codons. Yeah, I don't know that you have to know the pairs, but it would, yeah. You'd pair those codons, make a copy of it. And then translation is translating the RNA to an actual protein. So the ribosome comes and attaches to the RNA. Do you guys talk? I don't know that you have to know all the little steps. There's like several different steps. Do you guys talk about rRNA, mRNA, and tRNA? Those parts that come in and they bring the codon and the anticodon. Yeah. As long as you know the basic difference between those. D, describe how the organism senses changes in its internal, external environment and responds to ensure survival. So what are some different things that organisms respond to? Yeah, I'm thinking more basic. Okay. I was thinking more like temperature. Chemicals. Some microorganisms are repelled by certain chemicals. Light. Sunflowers respond to different follow the light. Okay, those kind of stimulus are what I was thinking of. Because we'll talk about predator and prey in biodiversity part and ecosystems. Okay, 3.2 is on heredity. Remember your genetic part of biology. Punnett squares and all those good things. Oh, what are those called? I'm not sure. I can't remember. They show sex-linked traits. I can't remember. A says identify the information passed from parents to offspring. Offspring is coded in DNA. We talked about DNA. Inheritance is just how that gets passed on, and the traits are the different parts of the genes that get passed on. So pretty simple there. The basic structure of DNA, it's a double helix. It has 2 strands that are twisted. Mitosis is how a cell replicates itself. Your claymation, the steps of mitosis. Do you remember PMAT? So what are the phases? We have, first one would be prophase, metaphase, and telophase. You remembered something. What phase does the cell's life cycle spend most of the time in? No. No.
We just guessed all of them.
I know. It's not that one. Not any of those. It is interphase. So most of the cell's life is in interphase, and then there's a little fraction of the life that's actually mitosis, and then that little fraction gets split up into those 4 different phases. So very little of the life cycle is actually in metaphase. Now, some areas of your body have more cells replicating, and it's a faster rate than other. Like stem cells are it's called the basement membrane of your skin, like at the bottom, so it's because your skin's always regenerating itself. Those are areas where you can see a lot of mitosis occurring. When you study it and you looked in microscopes, you used onion root tip, right? That's an area in plant cells where it is replicating. Roots are growing really fast. Yeah, can't. Yep. And the nucleotides, those are the A, C, G. We talked about those. Those are the nucleotides. Yeah, for DNA, yep. Recognize how mutations can help, harm, or have no effect on an individual organism. What are some of the mutations? We have deletion, insertion. What is that? It's called a shift mutation, a codon shift. And then we put crossover in there because it changes. I don't know if it's actually considered a mutation, but it's changing the DNA a little bit when you copy it. Okay, and then describing that sexual reproduction results in a largely predictable variety of possible gene combinations in the offspring of any 2 parents. This is where we're going to get into the Punnett square part. And alleles, now those are the different traits. And so I'm going to put like big R, little r. Each of those are an allele. Right? Dominant, recessive. Yes, each R is an allele. No, each R is an allele. What's the difference between genotype and phenotype? I remember phenotype starts with the pH, so that's physical, right? So what you see, the physical trait. So whether or not you have blonde hair. But the genotype is the genetic code. So actually looking at your recessive and dominant genes, that what makes up what color of hair you have. Okay, heterozygous and homozygous. We're talking about the alleles. So heterozygous alleles would be, yep, big R, little r, and then homozygous would be, yep. Meiosis is the production of gametes. Right, the cells that will join together to make the offspring. Yeah. Yep. So we have, they're called haploid cells. They're haploid because they have half the number of chromosomes that the parent cell would have. The body cells are called diploid. So in our bodies, a body cell has how many chromosomes? Remember? 46. 46 chromosomes. And then the gamete would have 23. And then last thing, Punnett squares. Let's draw one. So let's say we have big R, little r, and big R, big R. So how many of these would be homozygous? What percentage? 50, yep. So being able to fill out Punnett square. Now you're not going to have to do those big complex ones with, and there's some of like 64 or something.
One time,
Ridiculous.
it was, what was it? It was like a ridiculous amount. And I actually like worked it out and I showed it to him. He's like, yeah, you guys are supposed to do that.
I think that's it. I think that's it for heredity. Next one, we have flow of matter and energy in ecosystems. Students will describe on a molecular level the cycling of matter and the flow of energy between organisms and their environment. So A says, explain how the stability of an ecosystem is increased by biological diversity. So biological diversity is just how many different species you have occurring. The stability of an ecosystem. So if you have more biological diversity, you're going to be more stable, because if one runs out, you probably have something else that you can use as a backup. Like if you have different species of plants and they only like a certain temperature, and you have a really bad freeze one year and it kills off all those species of plants, you have all these other species that can fill in the gap and still be able to. But if you only had that one kind of species of plant available and we had a cold winter and it killed it off, there's nothing left then for animals to eat. So more diversity produces more stability. The trophic levels would be like the plants at the bottom, and then the herbivores, and then the carnivores and omnivores. What each one eats is a different trophic level. Yeah. Yeah, grass, deer, and then mountain lion, or grass, cows, humans. Recognizing that atoms and molecules cycle among living and non-living components in the biosphere. So these are called the biogeochemical cycles. And that would be like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, how everything just gets used and reused. There's no new atoms from beginning of life on Earth, so everything's just being used over and over. So some of the atoms in your body could have been from the first, maybe from Adam and Eve. Biosphere. The whole looking at how the water carbon cycle all interact, all of them combined is the biosphere. C, explain how distribution and abundance of different organisms and ecosystems are limited by the availability of matter and energy and the ability of the ecosystem to retain or to recycle materials. So biomes are like the tundra, the savanna, deciduous forest, coniferous forests, those different areas. Mr. Chechela used to have you guys do green screen videos. Did the seniors maybe do those? Okay, I don't think the juniors did them. He stopped doing them, but you would talk about one biome. And the predator and prey relationship within those biomes are different. And then also being able to tell, okay, what if there's some sort of stressor? Maybe there's a new predator that comes in. What happens to the diversity and the numbers of predator and prey? Different things that can affect that relationship. And those different factors can be biotic or abiotic, and biotic is living. So that would be like a new predator coming in, or maybe there's one whole species dies off, and that's the food source for a different species. So what's going to happen? Abiotic would be non-living factors like a volcano erupting, or drought, or monsoons, or floods. Those are all different abiotic factors. Analyze factors which may influence environmental quality. So that would be like the pollution issue, acid rain. So what can affect those? Yeah. Especially like volcano eruptions, because it produces a lot of sulfur and ash. That would definitely affect the environmental quality. And then last is biodiversity. This would be the students describe the theory of biological evolution. So A, identify different types of adaptation necessary for survival, morphological, physiological, and behavioral. So there's just different adaptations. Behavioral, maybe instead of being scavenging, they have to become more aggressive or something to survive. Morphological and physiological. I'm trying to remember which one's which. I don't really remember. What's the... I don't think that's in here. There's a name for like where you have the same structure but it's used for a different function. Can't think of what that term is right now though.
I know exactly what you're
I'll try to think of it. I don't remember if it's one of these, is that what these are? I have to look this up. Maybe we'll have it here in a little bit. Parasites, they live off of another species. You can have some symbiotic relationships with parasites, like where both are benefiting, like the little fish that eat and clean off whales or sharks. They clean them all up, and so technically they'd be parasitic because they are living off of that animal, but it's a symbiotic. They're both helping each other. Both benefit, yep. Most parasites that we think of are not. They're harmful, like tapeworms or what's the name of there's a parasite you can get from cat poop. It starts with a T. Can't remember what the name of it is, but ringworm's a fungus. Well, there have been cases of kids getting it because they have sandbox. Yep, in the sandbox, and then they always tell pregnant women you aren't supposed to change cat litter boxes because you can get that parasite and be harmful for the baby. Okay, recognize that the concept of biological evolution is a theory which explains the consequence of the interactions of the potential for species to increase in numbers, genetic variability of offspring, a finite supply of resources, and ensuing selection by the environment, and leaving offspring better able to survive. That's biological evolution. Genetic variability can be maybe a new species moves into the area, brings in a whole new genetic variables that are able to maybe change the way that species survives in that environment. And biodiversity leads to stability. So the more diversity we've already talked about, it's more stability. And this is really looking at, there's a difference between micro and macro evolution. This is really microevolution, like looking at how species change over time to adapt to their environments, like the finch's beaks or different things. Macroevolution is the whole million of years thing. And oh, is it right there? Okay. Analogous. Yes, that would be it. Explain how natural selection provides a scientific explanation of the fossil record and the molecular similarities between the diverse species of living organisms. So looking at the fossil record, older organisms you would find deeper in the ground, right? Older would be deeper, upper would be younger. Using DNA sequences to verify relationships, so how close your DNA is supposed to help verify relationships. Yeah, and they'll even take it to the like chimpanzees and humans versus, natural selection would be how the species is adapted to be able to survive the environment. Mm-hmm. That's D, apply the theory of biological evolution to explain that biodiversity over time. Perfect. Go over these questions, and then if you bring in we can talk about them before you actually take your test on Monday.